We now have the pleasure of being joined by Albany offensive coordinator, Coach Joe Davis. Coach, how you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Can't thank you enough for coming on here and spending a few minutes with us. To get started, I guess, 2 years ago, you guys finished, predicted to finish last in the CAA preseason coaches poll, yet went on to rattle off ranked wins that year over Towson, Central Connecticut. Along similar lines, what could you say about just really the growth of this program that you've seen at Albany during your time there?
Yeah, well, it's been tremendous, and it obviously is a huge credit to our head football coach here, Greg Gattuso, in taking this program really out of the NEC and into the CAA, and certainly probably the most impatient people in the world are college football coaches. We want to see immediate returns and want to be the best that we can be right away. But it certainly has been a process, but it's been a fun process. And I think one of the cool things that we've seen here over the past few years is just our overall talent level continue to rise, and not only within our football program, but just the type of student athlete that we're able to attract here to UAlbany. And we obviously can continue to do those things.
Heading into Syracuse week now, I know obviously tough start to the season for you guys. You lose to number 4 NDSU week 1, follow it up with a tough 2-point loss in the home opener against URI. Coming to the Dome this weekend is, an FBS opponent, an in-state opponent, first ever matchup between the two schools. Is this sort of a game that you guys have had circled on that calendar since you got the schedule, or is it just that take it one game at a time kind of approach?
Yeah, I don't know that this is something that we have circled, and it's always a great challenge to play an FBS opponent, especially at the Power 5 level. And obviously when you have two schools in the state of New York, there's a lot of familiarity with coaches and recruits and the rosters and the kids that know each other and have played against each other and interacted with each other in the past. So no, I don't know that it's something that we circled, but we're excited about it. And we play in arguably the toughest FCS league in the country, and so every week for us is an absolute battle. And we always say in our league, first to worst, anybody can beat you just about any single weekend. So, but it's a great opportunity for our guys, and obviously a short trip for us. And we're hoping to go out and put our best foot forward, play great football on Saturday.
Diving into the offense now, Jeff Undercuffler, really the bread and butter of what you guys like to do offensively, threw for a freshman FCS record a few years ago, FCS leading 41 touchdown passes. What makes him so dynamic under center?
Yeah, well, the first thing you notice about Jeff is that he loves football. He loves to practice, he loves to play, he loves the competition on Saturday. And really right from the get-go when he was a freshman, he very much bought into the system. And when I say the system, it's not just the X's and O's, just the philosophy of the program and what we're trying to accomplish from that position and also from an offensive standpoint, So, but boy, he took off in 2019 and haven't had quite the start that we wanted to yet this fall. But, I've mentioned this before with great quarterbacks that usually it's only a matter of time before they kind of get on track and get cooking. And so for us to be successful as a program and as an offense, Jeff obviously has to be successful individually, and we're doing everything we can do, to foster that and continue to help him grow as a quarterback and as a leader of our team.
The quick follow-up to that, anything in specifics that you could pinpoint as to why maybe in 2021 he has not hit the ground running in maybe the way that some people have expected him to?
Yeah, I think that we're all trying to kind of put our finger on that a little bit. And certainly whether you're at Albany or Alabama, the quarterback's always going to get probably too much praise and too much blame when things aren't clicking perfectly. So, but it's a team effort. We as a coaching staff have to call better plays, put them in better position. We have to protect them better. We've got to run the football. We've got to be able to lean on that running game, more effectively than we have in the first couple of games here. And I think all those things contribute to the success of a quarterback.
Moving from Undercuffler now to Roy Alexander on the outside, someone who's averaging over 20 yards a catch and really has put a lot of people on notice through these first few weeks, going up against a Syracuse secondary that has looked pretty solid so far with two corners on the outside and Deuce Chestnut and Garrett Williams. But going back to Alexander, what makes him such a nightmare for opposing DBs?
Well, Roy's a really phenomenal athlete, and we knew that when we recruited him. He's a South Florida kid that actually came up to the Northeast here and did a year at prep school in Maine. And we took him initially as a cornerback, but sort of knew that he could potentially help us in other areas. And when the spring came around, we had a little bit of a log jam at corner and thought, hey, let's give him a look at wide receiver, and he certainly prospered here early on. But Roy still has a lot of work to do, and he'd be the first one to tell you that, and growing as a young player. But he's certainly a guy that we're excited about, and we see developing into a really great player for our program.
What was that transition like for him, moving from the defensive side of the ball to the offensive side of the ball, going from corner to receiver?
Probably a little easier than you would think, just because he didn't spend too much time at corner. He was there, not more than probably a couple months, and was still obviously a very young player, kind of getting his feet underneath him. So. But he's a natural athlete. He has really good hand placement. He's probably more quick and sudden than he is true straight line fast, but he's picked up the offense really well and has really kind of settled into that inside receiver role for us.
Outside of Undercuffler and Alexander, who are some names that perhaps maybe Syracuse fans maybe aren't too familiar with that they should be come Saturday?
Yeah, I've mentioned this before. The tight ends are such a huge part of our offense, and in our last full season, we had 3 tight ends combined to catch 11 touchdowns on the season, which is, among the tops in the country at any level of Division I football. And, and those guys started to get, kind of untracked a little bit this past Saturday. So we always hope to involve those guys. Thomas Greeny and Reniger, LJ Wesneski's a returning all conference tight end for us. So they're a huge part of our offense. And obviously the running back, Carl Mofor, is an All-American as well, and certainly a guy that, I've said this before, great running backs, you don't keep him down for too long, and he certainly hasn't had the production in these first couple games that we had hoped, or he certainly has worked for, but him getting on track, I think, is a matter of time and is a big part of our offense.
You mentioned that running game. You guys on the year just 37 yards on the ground per game. Is that more of a product of just that ground game having not clicked, the O-line, whatever it is, or is it more of a product of you guys just being more of a pass first type of approach offensively?
No, we would certainly identify ourselves as a run first offense, and that's always been the case here. And I've never been a big believer that statistics always tell the whole story. We've had seasons here where we were really a great rushing offense, maybe not in yards per game, but always had the ability to run it when we needed to run it, and run it when the whole stadium knows you're going to run it, and Carl's been able to provide that for us. So, he's a guy we just got to get on track. We've got to be patient with it. We've got to be diligent with it. You can't give up on those things. And just like any offense, whether it be Syracuse or Albany, when you're running the football, it certainly makes things a lot easier on the whole offense and on the whole team, moving forward, trying to win football games.
You guys held URI to just 16 points, albeit the loss last week. I know, Coach, obviously most of what you do is on the offensive side of things, but from a defensive standpoint, how has that unit clicked and gelled so far through the first 2 weeks? And how would you say, they really identify themselves from a defensive standpoint?
Yeah, our defense has always traditionally been very strong here and very consistent, and Coach Gattuso has a huge hand in our defense and the schematic organization of it. And Coach Bernard does a great job with it. And, one of the things just from going against our defense every day in practice, you'll notice about them is there's a lot of team speed over there, especially as it pertains to our level. So they're physical, they fly around. The scheme itself is not overcomplicated for them, so they're able to play very, very fast, and we'll continue to rely on them as this season goes, because it's a really good unit.
Syracuse on the season put up 29 points in week 1, only 7 in week 2 against Rutgers. Does it feel like, how much does that momentum factor really carry in? You guys obviously 0-2, want to get that weight off your shoulders of getting something in the win column. Is every week sort of a clean start, or do you roll into week 3 here with those 2 losses in the back of your head, making it that much more important that you go out there and get the dub this weekend?
It's a new week, it's a new week, and certainly as competitors, it's hard to let those losses go, and even when you win games, it's hard to kind of move on from those, the joy and the victory, so to speak. So, but it's a new week and it's a new opportunity for us, and I think our guys will come out and play very, very spirited football on Saturday.
All right, Coach. Last one I got for you here. If Albany comes to the Dome, or Albany, I should say, comes into the Dome and pulls off the upset this weekend, it is because fill in the blank.
It's because you protected the football. You protected the football, and you were able to get first downs and sustain drives and really prevent, in these games, the scholarship difference a lot of time shows up in the offensive and defensive lines. It shows up on special teams. And if you can prevent big plays from happening amongst those units and protect the football and sustain drives, boy, you got a great shot to be very, very competitive in this game.
All right, Coach, can't thank you enough. Best of luck this weekend.
Hey, you're very welcome. Thanks again for having me on.
With FCS week approaching, it's time to listen to an FCS expert. I'm joined by Dan Steenkamer. He's a correspondent for Hero Sports FCS. Dan, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to get a chance to talk a little bit of the intersection of FCS and FBS with you.
Yeah, so this is Syracuse's one FCS game of the year. It comes against an in-state opponent in Albany, and just generally covering the FCS. What's your impression of this Albany football team?
Well, I'd say big picture, Albany is a program that in the past 8 to 10 years has been on the rise. A little bit of a rut in the spring, in the 2020 season that had to be played in the spring due to COVID-19. But in general, on the rise. They joined the Colonial Athletic Association in 2013, starting with the 2013 season. And that's one of the 3 power conferences in the FCS. We're all familiar with the Power 5 in the FBS. But when it comes to the FCS, you're really looking at 3 power conferences, and the CAA, where Albany resides now, being one of them. So their rise started with joining the CAA, and then 2019, that was really their big breakthrough year, qualifying for the FCS playoffs, which is a 24-team bracket, and winning a game in the FCS playoffs for the first time in program history. So had a little bit of a down year in the spring, a truncated schedule that actually ended prematurely due to injuries that racked up on the roster and just the way the spring shook out for the Great Danes. But I would say all in all, a program that is ascending, both in terms of being in a power conference and also a recent playoff appearance.
I want to talk about that spring season in a sec, but first, the 2019 team, as you mentioned, made the FCS playoff, 9-5 record. How similar is that team to this team that we'll see this weekend?
Well, they do have a couple key pieces, real cornerstones still on that roster from 2019. It starts with the QB, Jeff Undercuffler. He was a redshirt freshman in that 2019 season, and he absolutely lit it up. He led all of the FCS, the entire country, in touchdown passes that year with 41. I believe it was 41. And that led Trey Lance, that was also playing in the FCS that year. So truly, you're looking at a guy who has the capability to absolutely light up the scoreboard, as well as the stat sheet, as well as the Albany record books. So Jeff Undercuffler returns at QB from that 2019 team. You're also looking at running back Carl Mofor is still another carryover from that 2019 team. So the offensive pieces are there, the big 1-2 punch. But all in all, they're looking to recapture some of that overall momentum because they made the playoffs in 2019, didn't get a fall 2020 season, and then just a really odd spring season, which I guess we'll get into in a second, that kind of just fizzled out, not really what they wanted in terms of momentum. So they're really looking to recapture the momentum with some familiar faces like Undercuffler and Mofor.
Undercuffler did have 41. You were right. Okay. And he had 42 total touchdowns, which tied Trey Lance, who had 28 in the air and 14 on the ground. Obviously, Lance has ascended and gone to the NFL. Is there a feeling that there's a future in football for Undercuffler as well?
I think there is. I mean, it starts with just how he right out of the gates had a great redshirt freshman campaign. I mean, I have my background primarily covering the University of Delaware Undercuffler made his first start as a true freshman in 2018 against Delaware, and even back then, you saw the flashes, you saw the physical, just the physique, his height for starters, but also just the way he was able to let it rip deep in 2019. Truly caught, I think, a lot of people in the CAA by surprise. Maybe in the spring, a little bit of regression. A part of that being losing receivers. Juwan Green is a wide receiver who's now in the NFL practice squad with the Atlanta Falcons. He was a big part of 2019 success. So some transitions as a wide receiver for him, maybe a little bit of regression coming with that. But he still has such a long career ahead of him that I think there is some potential that some NFL scouts are keeping tabs on him for maybe 2 or 3 years down the line.
So 2020, obviously a weird year. He regresses, but everyone in the FCS was dealing with a schedule way later than they thought it was going to be. Only 4 games. With that, you really don't get into a rhythm that you usually would in a typical season. Now coming into 2021, have you seen any rust just generally in the FCS from teams that have really not played a full season since 2019?
Well, actually, I mean, it's a great question because this is so unprecedented. You know, you have the vast majority of the FCS. There were some who played a barnstorming fall 2020 schedule of different FBS schools and maybe played 5 games, something like that. But the vast majority of the FCS competed in the spring where a playoff was held, where a championship was held. So Albany's in that group, and you might expect coming out of a partially played spring season a lot of rust, but really I think it's been the opposite in the FCS. A lot of teams seeing that calendar year of 2021 momentum just carry right through. I mean, there's eligibility relief in the FCS where there was no year of eligibility charged against players who competed in the spring season. So a lot of guys have used the extra eligibility. They're back. They've played an extra season, whatever length of season that was in the spring, and they really have all the more experience to carry them into this fall. So I actually think it's been a little bit of a benefit. Maybe if you ask me in November how it looks when guys have been playing since March in 2021, 2 seasons played 1 calendar year, that might catch up to you later in this fall season. But I think actually at the beginning of this year, it's been beneficial for a lot of teams who played even a handful of games in the spring. And I think Albany fits in that category.
That's interesting. I didn't think about how it's like the most real spring football anyone can have.
Yep.
Coming into this year, Albany has lost its first 2 games. North Dakota State, who's obviously a powerhouse in the FCS, and then Rhode Island. What are your thoughts on the Great Danes starting 0-2?
Well, it's a difficult schedule to start. I mean, the Rhode Island's an on-the-rise program in the CAA as well. I keep saying on the rise, but it's so true for Rhode Island in particular, which has really struggled in the past, but is getting a lot more competitive. And then North Dakota State's a name that everybody recognizes, even if you're just a casual, I think I know what FCS stands for. North Dakota State, whether it's the NFL quarterbacks, it's the championships, that's a brand that just continues to be really hard to beat, especially on the road in the Fargo Dome. So I guess the one thing you can take away for Albany is they have experience in a dome, right? So they played in the Fargo Dome and NDSU. So coming to the Carrier Dome, maybe not as much of a noise adjustment. I mean, it's 2 really loud venues, 2 larger venues than Albany is used to playing in on a regular week-to-week basis in the FCS. So that's one positive thing to take away. But more so on the field, I think the defense for Albany is really something that's been something to hang their hat on. Undercuff in the offense, maybe haven't gotten going to the extent they'd like so far, but they hung in there with NDSU. They were down 14-7 at the half at NDSU, so their defense was keeping them in that ball game. And much the same way against Rhode Island, a team that has a really good offense, that's young and up and coming. Albany was holding those guys to field goals throughout the game. You look at a 16-14 final score. It was really just a matter of a couple of special teams miscues by Albany, really not finishing drives on offense that kept them falling short on the scoreboard that week. So I think you hang their hat on your defense and also just the experience playing NDSU, being on the road in a loud environment. That's all stuff that kind of hopefully they're thinking will translate into this week's game at Q's.
What's kind of the style of the defense or the lead trait of this defense that allows it to be successful?
Well, for me, watching Albany, the front 7 jumps out right away. I mean, these are guys who, I mean, you look at experience across the team, just with I mentioned the extra eligibility, but it's especially apparent on the front 7. Jared Verse is an outstanding defensive end. He was the 2020 CAA Rookie of the Year on the defensive side of the ball. So he's somebody who Albany is going to be looking to get after the quarterback, or whether it's Tommy DeVito or Garrett Schrader. He's going to be a big focal point for the Albany defense. And then the other half of that back 7 is it's the linebacking group. I mean, the starting linebackers are some of the probably most underrated in the CAA. Danny D'Amico is a really strong linebacker. AJ Missler is another starter. And they're also rounded out by Jackson Ambush. And I don't know if there's a better name for a defender than Ambush. So Jackson Ambush is another guy who's a really young player who has stood out in the CAA so far. They really swarm to the ball. Their head coach, Greg Gattuso, was a defensive lineman at Penn State in his playing days. So we're talking about an Albany bunch that predicates on being physical. They fly to the ball, but especially it all starts with the front 7.
I'm sure our broadcasters at WAER are going to have a lot of fun with Ambush this weekend. And let's talk about the matchup. You go to Syracuse, you've seen a handful of their games so far, and you watch Albany. How do you think these two teams measure up?
Well, I think for starters, you're always looking at Albany has a depth disadvantage in terms of fewer scholarships. There are going to be fewer guys they can go to who have college experience. The size mismatches are going to be there in a Power 5 versus Power 5 versus CAA team. There's going to be discrepancies there, but that all applies to any FBS game. But for this game in particular, I think Albany is going to have to get better in the offensive line. They're going to have to keep Jeff Undercuffler comfortable to an extent. He showed some happy feet against Rhode Island, where if he just set his feet a little more and wasn't anticipating pressure so often, he might have a little more success gaining rapport with his new receivers. I mentioned him having some newer receivers compared to his 2019 year. So I think it really starts up front on the offensive line for Albany. If they're able to put some drives together that keep the Syracuse offense on the sideline, make them a spectator, gain some confidence, and it all starts up front. So Albany struggled a little bit with that in the first 2 weeks. They're going to have to get that corrected. They're going to have to correct essential special teams errors. I mentioned special teams earlier. They had two mishandled snaps on field goals that cost them 6 points total against Rhode Island. And you just can't have that happen in a game where you're going to be, let's say, a 3-touchdown underdog, if not more. So those are all things that Albany has to clean up. But the potential is there from 2019 to the flashes they showed in the spring. The potential is there, but they will be a deserved underdog this week.
And they only lost by 2 points to Rhode Island. So either of those field goals would have made the difference. When it's FBS versus FCS, rather, upset watch is kind of on everyone's mind. ACC football fans saw Florida State lose to their first FCS opponent in program history, Jacksonville State. So if you were to put it on a scale of 1 to 10, what do you think the odds are that Albany comes out with the victory?
Putting it 1 to 10, I'm going to have to, I do cover the CAA, I do cover the FCS, but being very objective here, I am going to have to put it going to have to look like a 2. I'm going to back Syracuse a lot here, mostly because I think Albany's just trying to get some confidence going. Like, they don't have the momentum that suggests to me they're ready to pull off a Florida State upset that you just described. It's just not there looking at them. They had a really tough first week at NDSU where mostly you get beat up and you really learn how far you have to go. And then they're coming off a tough game against Rhode Island where lacking a little too much on offense and special teams. Defense, like we've said a couple time and time again, pretty strong, but it's the offense and special teams for me. All three phases need to come together. It sounds cliche, but when you're the underdog, it really does have to be every single group of your team. And so I just didn't see enough of that to give me more than a 2 level of confidence. It can't be a 1 because that's not fair to Albany, the talent they bring back, the quarterback they have, the skill position players they have. But at the end of the day, offensive line needs to be a little more sturdy, needs to come together a little more. And so that caps it at the 2 for me. Syracuse put away Ohio in week 1. And so this is kind of another opponent underdog that I would think they should be able to take care of.
Well, giving them a 2 is saying that there's a chance for Albany.
There's a chance.
And we will be excited to watch it on Saturday. Dan, thank you so much for coming on and giving us a little look into the FCS.
It was a blast. Thank you so much. I had a great time with it.